Damn, my mama essay-ish, what do you hear, what do you say? Damn, my mama illusion-ish, Moby Dick, I'm here to play. Damn, my mama griefing-ish, give me all the loot. Damn, my mama essay-ish, where did you hear that?
Welcome to our live test of an experiment. Let's
What?
go. Let's hop right in.
Where?
Wait, how does it go? Autism what? Autism Unite?
Autism. Autism activating.
Okay. Autism activated! Oh my Okay. I'm sorry to overload you. Okay. When I was 15, I came out to my grandfather, telling him I wanted to be a critic, and I cried on the porch in the wind as he told me, "Why don't you create?" I used to get Game Informer magazines once a month, and I would read them cover to cover. 16 years later today, and I'm still working out the kinks of criticism, the blending of duty and play. I originally started this essay with the following declaration: let what we say about momentous art be as short as it is sweet, so we not only reserve life for living, but so we also don't forget what beauty is. Melville himself would eventually give us the old Henry James had we hounded him to say more on the whale. Quote, "There's really too much to say," end quote. This is the critic's drive, at least for me, that since the budding and eventually flourishing trust in all forms of art around us acts as the ethereal gateway to all possible lofty art ever, we find purpose in exalting those one-of-a-kind arts, those little humanities that have delightfully instructed us. Stephen Hall's The Raw Shark texts is such a humanity. To what extent will we go to regain certain memories? How do we hold on to memory? What do we create in its place when memory's gone? Can we love and imagine at the same time? What in God's name is illusion? Protagonist Eric Sanderson must navigate these questions after receiving a letter from his past self that warns him a giant conceptual shark is on the hunt for him. If I wasn't teeming to exalt this book's effect on me, I could cut the review short and say that everything I've wanted for our times as a die-hard fan of Ishmael's Whale Voyage, everything I've hoped could happen in a 2007 novel with regards to juggling reality and allegory, all these expectations were met in Stephen Hall's The Raw Shark texts. It's as if Ishmael liked Austin Powers, Fight Club, and roguelike video games. Of note, this book was published in 2007, a year before Spelunky, arguably the most explosive game in the genre. In fact, this book is like Mobius Digital's 2019 space exploration game Outer Wilds, had it starred humans, and there was a love interest. The Raw Shark Text is a book whose narrator would enjoy elucidating the idea that to rate a work of art out of 10 is nearly as bad as to rate out of 10 a woman's looks. Half expecting something like House of Leaves, or at least a postmodern, post-apocalyptic incoherence, I began reading the Raw Shark texts much like Eric began reading the letters his former self scheduled for him, quite suspiciously. I suppose there's always a threat in the excitement beginning to read the book, not letting us forget that we tend to lose interest quickly and, frankly, reading is a commitment. But like every good book, given the right mood, it pulled me in fast. The Raw Shark text stars the hero that dares escape House of Leaves' labyrinth by the thread of illusion given to him by his love, Cleo Ames. The whole story is lucidly written, and if I was forced to say something negative about it on the first read-through, I hardly struggled. This is the curious case of criticism that asks, if it comes off too easy, and if we don't have to work a little for it, how are we going to work up the pity? Why would we reread it? We'll answer these questions too, I hope, but for the time being, let's remind ourselves that which we don't understand or understand too well, let us not immediately underrate. But hold, talk of difficulty forces us to readjust our criticism's bridles, and whenever that happens, it's time for a style check. On the book's cover, the San Francisco Chronicle says, it is, quote, paced like a thriller, reads like a deluge, Herman Melville meets Michael Crichton, or Thomas Pynchon meets Douglas Adams, end quote. This not only helped convince me to open the book, but it's the perfect launching point to describe Hall's style. He is as down-to-earth as the popular scientist without ever getting too cheeky. A little cheeky helps us see the big picture, as he proves. The two cheekier buggers mentioned here are Adams and Pynchon, but I mean more Adams, for Pynchon's cheeks are more like moons, which are shrouded by third-person narration, a magnificent cast of characters, and his comic power for illusion. Hall indeed manages to find the middle ground in humor's high and low in the Rorschach texts. In other words, no matter your field, your profession, you will find what it means to be human here. Hall is borderline accessible and borderline deep. If the canon were an anti-gravity walkway into the sublime, Hall, aptly named, would stand there on that path with this book right when white turns to black, black turns to white, and colors explode. And I don't have it written here, but if you enjoy Jurassic Park, you'll certainly like this. Anything is accessible as long as we trust it and relax. Read Finnegan's Wake 3 minutes a day after your minute plank and mark how your tongue gets stronger. But being borderline deep might be construed as being too centered and murky, or not deep at all, for we haven't entered the deep. But if we're going to talk the abyss, frankly I've been putting off getting to the meaning of this book because I have dozens of pages of notes, many of which are direct quotes that seem too beautiful not to forget. Like Ishmael before losing his platonic bias, I'm atop the crow's nest searching for meaning, not the whale. Like Eric Sanderson, I don't know if it's best for me to listen to the doctor's advice and stay at home, or peer again into the mounds and mounds of letters that keep piling up, indicating my forgotten past and my will to live. How difficult it is to speak of a complex being. In my Who Threw Mama Off the Aircraft Carrier, it took dozens of poem fragments for me to put together a glimmer of what even one of my friends mean to me. 40 for Levi, 55 for my wife. And those cogitations are stretched out over a year. Here, now that we've had a whiff of the style, we can track its scent as we wade through the plot and pull out the meaning. And I think I've reached the point where I've sufficiently recommended the text, and I think my dog spoiler likes you, so I'm going to take off his leash. You like dogs, right? Ever fish for criticism? Yeah, you can pet him. Protagonist Eric Sanderson has a cat named Ian, who often expresses antediluvian disappointment in our hero. Eric also has a doctor who says, but don't write letters for yourself, quote, it could be incredibly destabilizing for you, end quote. Enter the idea of writing as destabilizing not a dozen pages into our story. As Plato relates, the Egyptian god Thoth came to his superior Thomas with his inventions, and Thomas praised some, but disapproved first and foremost writing. For this invention will produce forgetfulness in the minds of those who learn to use it, because they will not practice their memory. Their trust in writing, produced by external characters which are no part of themselves, will discourage the use of their own memory within them. End quote. We have a lot to attempt to contain if we're not going to mention how much Plato has written, how much I have written, and how much I agree. In my previous lecture, I focused on the doctor in Satantango, around whom that story spins, and who spies on his neighbors and writes every single thing he sees and says, creating his own bleak world within the apocalypse. Thamus wasn't wrong. So when at the onset of our mystery adventure in the Rorschach texts, the narrator is advised not to write to himself, and not from himself to read, that, at least for me, is the apocalypse. So what do we do when we can't read, write, or remember how to live? When there's something within us that simultaneously drives us to know and to shut the hell up? What in the world do we have to do with illusion? I ask 1 minute, and then I need meaning and I need it now, the next. The Rorschach texts poses such questions, and then, before the question can be clipped and the idea felled, enter reality, where Ian the cat stares at us displeased, another wet package of letters from ourselves has arrived, and we still haven't taken a leap. Or have we? Quote, every single cell in the human body replaces itself over a period of 7 years. That means there's not even the smaller part of you now that was part of you 7 years ago. End quote. Our Heraclitus connection, according to the scientific standard. Everything moves, nothing stays still. The planets are always spinning, our characters too, and if we're going to be hunted by a giant conceptual shark, we're going to have to be rather spinned into the major ideas that drive our desire to know. For the first quarter of the book, Eric Sanderson carries the weight of these ideas, as his own clues left behind around the house drive him to rediscover pain and memory, or why he's even living in the first place. To what elusive extents we go to lead ourselves to discover that which we're dying to forget. Ishmael on the first page of Moby Dick explains why he takes to the high sea, so he doesn't go around and knock other people's hats off. The only hint we get regarding the blue waves of Eric Sanderson's past is that he used to have a girlfriend, Cleo Ames, and God was she cool, God was she real. I can't imagine Ishmael with a girlfriend. Can't. Not because the marriage of the bosom friends with their black and white heads together warms my homosocial heart, but because I think the little melancholic Christian with the ounce of good humor he had left sacrificed his sexual impulse to the search of truth in nature. This is not to say that Hall's hero, haunted by the phantom sharks of the collective consciousness, does not himself love truth, but he also loves a woman, and has sex with 2 more women than Ishmael does, and at any rate, we have to admit, that complicates things. Say what you want about Ishmael. Leave Melville out of it, they are not the same. But we must admit he puts everything on the line, and in his first 3 words he wins us over as someone who knows what he is talking about. Call me Ishmael. Only a best friend could utter something so coolly. When he errs, of course he errs, the beauty lies in aligning his majestic cognition faults with the water ruptures coming to life in the wake of thunderhead Ahab's pursuit of the thing in itself. Queequeg is Ishmael's love, the whale is Ahab's Lucifer, and the raw shark texts Eric Sanderson in his first-person account loved Cleo Ames, who, all major spoilers, seriously major spoilers, and other grief-stricken, postponed, interconnected allusions to ourselves aside, died on holiday while scuba diving, after taking dozens of photos of a rainbow assortment of fish, the photos of which, after Eric threw them out, totemize his regret, the trauma-laden half-widower. My grandfather died in 2019 at 81, my dad's dad. I was at work when my grandma called me and was crying, and I was there in half an hour, and halfway up the stairs I cried. He was a strong, black, no-nonsense man who wasn't afraid to sing and tell a joke. He was mighty and had big hands and a good ear for jazz, himself a baritone. He was the deep voice in Blue Moon. He was Clint Eastwood mixed with Clay Davis singing "Shit," and then catching you on the low. 6 months after he died, Anna and I were on vacation in Chicago, as close as I'd ever been to my grandpa's hometown of Ashtabula, Ohio. His niece, whom I never met, lived there, and I talked to her on the phone that day, but we agreed not to visit for COVID was breaking out. At night, Anna and I walked the bars with her 2 friends, and at one point we stopped for hot dogs. And I imagined my grandfather walking around and laughing and smiling at me, and I cried, nonstop, for a half an hour, no exaggeration. As proof I cried that long, I was called out by Anna and her friends for being weird. She has long since made up for it, and I've done much worse. Thus, grief is complicated by that law of humanity which states our motivations are anything but a straight line. In Moby Dick, it is the white line of the horizon by which the white whale flaunts. In Blood Meridian is the red horizon of those red planetary characters surfacing, and in the raw shark text it is the absence of a woman once loved which holds the lover home, and the light can't surface in the dark if love cannot. We are hunted and haunted by our heartbreaks. Thankfully, my grandpa died at home. But a few months before that, when he spent a month in a little old folks home, I spent maybe 1/7 of the time with him that I should have. I've since forgiven myself now on his account, and he said many things in his last few days that helped me remember him rightly, but to this day, the grief has remained the wind and the rain to the Allusion deluge. It revolves, too. Near the end of the book, quote, "I feel like I fell off the world," Scout said. The love interest image. You ever get that? I shook my head. For me, it's more like everyone else fell and left me and Ian on our own. End quote. There's the whale and then there's the clown. Death is the tortoise. Illusions, however latent, revolve. Just last summer, after 3 years of crying, only twice as a teacher, I sat on the toilet, thought of Hart Crane's death, and burst into tears for an hour. 6 months later, I'm just now realizing I was grieving. Here is my account of that day, borrowed from a poem in progress, perhaps stolen. I sat on the toilet and looked at the curtains and thought of Hart Crane jumping to his death into the raging water below, and I cried, and I cried, and I thought of everything, and I couldn't stop crying, and I saw myself, and I moved to places I hadn't been before. I sat on the kitchen floor, I leaned against the couch and gripped, I shook the kitchen sink, At one point, black ooze appeared. I kicked behind me like a horse. I raged, and riding seemed stupid, and I was sorry for everything, for what I've done, and I called myself stupid again and again, and when I saw butterfly stickers above the dryer, I cried again, thinking of my students, of Brian out there roaming, and Alyssa, and I gripped the counter, and I pulled my hair, and I cried my ears red and snot out my nose, and I washed my face in the sink and rubbed it with a towel, and thought of decay, and transience, and our general disconnect, and everyone living their lives, and my inability. I cried, I barked, I raged, and I called myself stupid, fucking stupid, oh my god, you idiot, and I thought of everyone in Suttree, and every thought was a tear. I was still, for a moment, on the couch when I thought of Mom, and I looked up and paused, and was Cabanel's fallen angel, and I was still. I cried again and roared and barked 4 different pitches throughout, and raged and hated dope and every sin I've committed, and ever being afraid of touching anything. Anna called, and I could tell I had been crying, or she could tell I had been crying, and she came home immediately, and I partially relayed what I felt, and soon I was calm. Sometimes I feel so overwhelmed by meaning that I strictly pursue style, and only now, after synthesizing these texts a little, do I think maybe we could improve general critical thought if we treated the reaction of style to meaning more like a chemical reaction that requires an immediate result according to natural law. How else are we ever going to see if we cannot admire how something looks? Here are 15 excerpts which I think exemplify Hall's clear blue style, which, as much as it borders on being young adult, exasperating, and vainly sentimental, so do I. In fact, by splicing 15 fragments from across the book like this, it appears as if I've created one of my strings of day-long poems from my Who Threw Mama or How to Time Travel. Here are the quotes. Now, right on that tap, stop. Stop imagining. Here's the real game. Here's what's obvious and wonderful and terrible all at the same time. The lake is my head, in my head. The lake I was imagining has just become the lake in your head. It doesn't matter if you never know me, or never know anything about me. I could be dead. I could have been dead 100 years before you were ever born, and still, think about this carefully. Think past the obvious sense of it to the huge and amazing miracle hiding inside. The lake in my head has become the lake in your head. 2. From 4 degrees of separation, the shadow under the water catches a scent, a curved, rising signifier, a black idea fin of momentum and intent cuts through the distance between us and a spray of memes. One morning, I pulled a cup from the draining board too quickly and knocked a plate into the sink. The plate didn't break, but there was a loud crash, and the noise made me burst into tears for no reason at all. My heart was deep space, and my head was maths. My life as a shopping list. I nodded. She was being nice, and I was feeling even more stupid than before. I looked at her, and a voice inside me said, "We only see starlight because all the stars are bleeding." I learned what little Eric could remember about the labelless car parks, access tunnels, and buried places that made up unspace. I learned how to set up fake conceptual flows and short-circuit the existing ones, how to attach the bracken and lichen of foreign ideas to my scalp and work the mud and grass of another self into and over my skin and clothes until I could become invisible at will, until anyone or anything could be looking straight at me and never see the real me at all. Quote, "At the end of the day," end quote, that's one of mine which is particularly virulent in the UK at the moment. Right? On making people laugh, I've always been better at the long-range stuff. Cleo's badness smile is something else. The edges of her normal smile turn sharp like little blades and her eyes go all shiny and electric. The humanity in couples catching up with other couples is this following quote. "We had to keep explaining things, backtracking and filling gaps. We realized our own conversations had evolved into a kind of shorthand, a tidy, neat little minimalism. Covering the whole canvas in broad, obvious brushstrokes for outsiders felt like a waste of sounds, time, and effort. Speaking with footnotes, Cleo would call it later, as we ambled backwards towards the tent. Still, they were nice enough, and we did have some fun with them. In the first dark scene, the little green smoke detector light on the ceiling became my distant North Star." A few more quotes from the Raw Shark texts. You know what? I'm going to go start judging authors by how they describe the wind and the rain. The rain came down so hard it had real weight, beating my head and shoulders into a flinch, pouring heavy over my waterlogged clothes and streaming in flukes from my hood and from my elbows and from the bottom of my coat. Hard, heavy, roaring, and angry. This rain was difficult to see. I brought a hand up to shield my eyes, but this created a new shelf, and flow of fresh rivulets were soon twisting themselves off the ends of my fingers and curling their way under my hood to run down my cheeks and chin. I struggled to blink away as much water I could. We told jokes, getting into a rhythm of acting like A, our own jokes were far funnier than they really were, and B, that each other's jokes were bad beyond belief. After one of my punchlines, Scout stopped suddenly, standing still under the flickering lights. Lastly, the last of the summer still finds its way through the clouds some afternoons, but the night is coming in earlier, and the fat-bodied spiders have built a maze of webs across the alleyway at the bottom of the garden. In the early morning, they're all silver with dew. I'm not really noticed any of this until today. For me, it still feels like late August. The clocks tick, but nothing seems to change, no matter how far the hands travel. I want to end on something naughty, and since the burden is not wholly on me to put everything together as we're cleaning up and waiting for our rides, why not a ghost story? A third of the way through the book, Eric Sanderson navigates the unspace of abandoned staircases, sewer systems, back rooms, and deep into the underground world, he meets Mr. Nobody, who appears to be a handsome young Tom Cruise type with sunglasses. As Eric speaks to him about the conspiracy, though, he notices Mr. Nobody starts to sweat, and at one point he seems to melt. He says, quote, "Geniuses don't go mad. That's what people don't understand. They get out so far that the water is like glass and they can see for miles and see so much and in ways people have never seen before. They go out over such depths, down, down, down and down, and some of them get taken. Something rushes up out of their thoughts. From the insides of their own heads and through the act of looking and the thinking itself, because the deep blue is in there too. Do you understand? And it takes them." Right at the point of Mr. Nobody telling, end quote, right at the point of Mr. Nobody telling Eric what his elusive self wants to hear, Mr. Nobody then starts taking on characteristics of that other evil offshoot of Moby Dick, Pennywise the Clown. Quote, "His wet face became serene and angelic, the way a face in a coffin is serene and angelic, calm and wise. His head tilted a little, mechanically. The important thing now is to give up, he said quietly. His voice was different. There was something far beyond the words and their sounds. You know the truth. You know you're already dead. Deep down you know it. Eric Sanderson's gone. A long time gone. And Cleo Ames. All of it. Everything he was is over now. You should let his body go too. You should stop kicking and let it float, bob, and slip all away. Let it sink down to the bottom with the quiet and the stones and the crabs. It will be all right. Storms on the surface can't hurt us anymore. You'll all float down here. Don't you want it? Don't you want it? I can hear Tim Curry's voice, and I think Stephen Hall could too, for even his immediate description of what happens next reads like it was directly inspired by the 1990 It TV movie. Quote, constant brown water flowed off the ends of his fingers and elbows as he pushed himself up in the chair. It ran from his trouser bottoms and leaked from his shoes, making dirty, growing puddles that smelled of seaweed rotting in the sun. End quote. I've reserved the campiest for last. Pennywise the Clown has transmogrified into that giant shark, that Ludovician that's after Eric, and Eric, at once the Cyclops and Odysseus, is saved from this world eater situation in a way that only someone who sings along loudly to a band like Linkin Park can enjoy. When everything is dark and seems to be lost, when not even the North Star can help, when even high literature seems to be a mug's game. Shh, a girl's voice said close behind my ear. I froze. You still smoke those horrible menthol cigarettes? No. I, babbling, not thinking. I don't. Well, you do now. Another hand reached around me and pushed a lit cigarette into my mouth.
Snake, can you hear me? Snake! Snake!